Welcome, brave souls and curious wanderers, to a guidebook quite unlike any other you've encountered. Within lies a collection of indispensable tips designed not just for mere survival, but for navigating the delicate intricacies of interacting with the most capricious denizens of the magical world, fairies. Why might you need such guidance, you ask? Picture this: a world just a shadow's breath away from our own, where the air shimmers with enchantment and every leaf and stone may house a watchful eye. This is the realm of the fairies, a place where beauty intertwines with danger as closely as vines on an ancient oak. Here, the unwritten rules are as crucial as they are unspoken, and breaking them can mean more than a simple faux pas at a fairy banquet. It could tether your fate to a twilight existence forever. Our journey through the fairy-haunted woods is not for the faint of heart. It is for the adventurers, the dreamers, the hikers who've strayed from the path, and the midnight gardeners who've noticed something glimmering in the periphery of their vision. You see, fairies are not the forgiving type, and they protect their secrets with a blend of allure and peril. From wearing your clothes inside out to avoiding the allure of a seemingly innocent fairy ring, each tip herein is bolstered by centuries of lore and countless testimonies from those who've ventured into the enchanted realms and lived to tell their tales. Some with a smile, others with a shudder. Prepare yourself for a guide that reads like a map to buried treasure. Each chapter is a stepping stone through a forest thick with the whispers of the unseen. Walk softly, carry a sturdy iron nail, and keep your wits as sharp as the edge of night. After all, in the realm of fairies, every detail matters, and even the smallest misstep can make all the difference between a magical encounter and an eternal enchantment. With this in mind, may your steps be silent, your passage safe, and your return home assured. Let us begin. Tip 1. Respect their bloody boundaries. When it comes to fairies, the first rule of survival isn't about what you should do. It's about what you absolutely must not do. Don't trespass into their territory without permission. Yes, the fairy realm is not clearly marked, and no, there are no signs that say, "Keep out, this means you, Clive." But trust me, you'll feel it. The sudden chill in the air, the eerie silence, and the inexplicable feeling of dozens of eyes watching you from just beyond sight. Imagine you're walking through the woods, and everything goes quiet. Too quiet. The birds stop singing, the wind stops blowing, and even the mosquitoes take a bloody break from feasting on you. That's not just nature being dramatic. That's your first warning sign. The fairies are telling you to back the hell up and reconsider your path. Now, should you ignore these subtle hints, like an absolute muppet, and continue traipsing through their domain, be prepared to make amends quickly. Apologizing to fairies isn't about muttering a half-hearted sorry while continuing on your merry way. No, you need to mentally broadcast your regret with the intensity of a radio jingle stuck in your head. Think of it as shouting, "I'm sorry," in mental capital letters. But let's say you're the stubborn type, or perhaps just incredibly daft, and you decide to keep going. You might notice the atmosphere thickening, a kind of invisible pressure that urges you to turn around. This is the fairy equivalent of a final warning shot. A courtesy, really, before they resort to more direct measures. Fairies don't like to be seen, but they do love making their displeasure known. A common trick is to lead you in circles until you realize you're not too bright, or until night falls, whichever comes first. More vindictive spirits might enchant you to dance until you collapse from exhaustion, or worse, turn every step you take into a thorn-sharp agony. So, the moral of the story? When you enter a forest, respect its silent masters. Stick to the path, keep your head down, and for heaven's sake, keep your ears open. If the woods go quiet, remember that it's not just about respecting nature. It's about not ending up in a fairy's prank that could last longer than your patience at a DMV. Stick to these tips, and you may just avoid turning a peaceful hike into a supernatural fiasco. Tip 2. Offerings are key. Crossing into fairy territory without an offering is like showing up to a potluck dinner empty-handed. It's just plain rude, and you'll likely leave with fewer friends and more enemies. Fairies, much like your always hungry Uncle Jerry at family gatherings, appreciate a good snack. But instead of potato salad, they prefer gifts that cater to their whimsical and naturalistic tastes. The best offerings are simple yet thoughtful. A small saucer of cream, a knob of butter, or a spoonful of honey left at the edge of an old oak tree can do wonders for your relationship with the local fairy populace. Think of it as greasing the wheels, or in more mystical terms, ensuring that the fairies are more inclined to help you find your lost keys rather than hide them even further. However, let's be clear, the specifics matter. Don't just chuck a dollop of honey from your half-squeezed bear-shaped bottle and call it a day. Fairies are not fans of half-assed efforts. They want to see that you've put some thought into it. A neatly arranged offering on a little leaf plate, perhaps accompanied by a shiny trinket or a strand of colorful yarn, shows that you respect their culture. It's like fairy diplomacy, only with more glitter and less bureaucracy. But here's where people fuck up. They overdo it. Bringing an entire cake to leave at the foot of a fairy mound might seem like a grand gesture to you. To them, it's just ostentatious. You might as well wear a sign that says, "I'm new here and I have no idea what I'm doing." Keep it modest. Fairies like their humans humble and their gifts size appropriate. Let me tell you about the time my cousin Eddie decided to impress the fairies. He read somewhere that fairies liked whiskey, a debatable point depending on the fairy's personal vice. So, he left a full bottle of expensive single malt scotch by a fairy ring. Big mistake. The fairies, enraged by his extravagance and perhaps a bit overwhelmed by the alcohol content, decided to teach him a lesson. For 3 days and 3 nights, Eddie couldn't stop dancing. He jigged and reeled through town like a man possessed, much to the amusement of locals and the dismay of his sore feet. The moral? Don't show off, and never assume fairies can handle their liquor. In essence, when dealing with fairies, think simple, think sweet, and always keep it small scale. A little goes a long way. And in the world of fairies, the right offering can turn a potentially perilous encounter into a pleasant exchange. Or at the very least, it can prevent you from involuntarily entering a dance marathon sponsored by mischievous woodland spirits. Tip 3. Wear your clothes inside out. Alright, strap in, folks, because this next tip is a real doozy and might just make you question the fashion advice you've been following all your life. When venturing into fairy-dominated territories, do yourself a massive favor. Wear your clothes inside out. Yes, you heard me right. It's not a typo. Inside out. It sounds like a toddler's dressing strategy or something you might do after a night out when you're too knackered to notice your shirt's backwards. But there's method in the madness. Why, you ask? Because fairies, those tricky little sprites, get utterly bamboozled by someone rocking the inside-out look. It throws off their mischievous magic and makes you less susceptible to their tricks. Think of it as a fairy repellent, but more fashionable and less sticky than spraying yourself with bug spray. Now, before you go thinking you'll look like a right prat wandering the woods with your labels showing and seams glaring, consider the alternative. Would you rather maintain your usual impeccable style and end up turned into a frog? Or would you prefer looking a bit daft temporarily but return home in your original human form? I thought so. Frog life isn't all it's cracked up to be. Just ask any former prince. Here's the kicker. The first time I tried this, I had my doubts. There I was, standing at the edge of an ancient grove, socks on the outside, shirt tag fluttering in the wind like a tiny flag of surrender. I felt like a complete numpty. But as I ventured deeper into the woods and noticed the absence of usual fairy shenanigans, no sudden trips, no mysterious giggles carried by the wind, I realized something was working. Of course, this led to an awkward encounter with a group of hikers who looked at me as if I'd lost my marbles. One of them, a kindly old lady, even offered me a safety pin to fix my apparent wardrobe malfunction. I had to politely decline, explaining I was experimenting with a new fairy-proof hiking gear. The look of baffled concern on her face was priceless. So, Pop your trousers on inside out, flip that jumper around, and march into those fairy-infested woods with the confidence of someone who's got their magical bases covered. You might get a few odd looks, but it's a small price to pay for not ending up under some fairy spell where you can only speak in rhymes or, worse, think every meal should include Brussels sprouts. Let's be honest, nobody wants that, not even fairies. Tip 4. Avoid fairy rings like you avoid your ex. If you ever find yourself frolicking through the woods and stumble upon a perfectly circular ring of mushrooms, here's a free tip. Don't step into it. Seriously, don't. These aren't just fungal formations doing the conga. They're fairy rings, and they spell trouble with a capital T. Stepping into one is like accidentally texting your ex at 2 a.m. Nothing good will come of it. Now, fairy rings might look charming or temptingly mystical, like nature's own version of a crop circle, but they are notorious in the fairy world for being tricky traps. The fairies use them like spiderwebs to catch bumbling humans. You see, fairies have this odd sense of humor where they think it's hilarious to make humans lose time. Step into a ring, and you might think you've only been there for a few minutes, but in reality, you've missed 3 seasons of your favorite show and your cat has filed a missing person report. The first rule when you spot a fairy ring is simple. Admire it from a distance. Treat it like that piece of expensive furniture in your aunt's living room that you're not allowed to touch. Look, don't touch, and certainly don't walk through it. If you think, hey, it might be fun to see what happens, remind yourself that you might end up watching the next century's New Year's fireworks as your grandkids telepathically tweet about your ancient folly. Imagine you're hiking, and suddenly there's this mushroom circle looking all inviting. Your first thought might be, what's the worst that could happen? Well, let me paint a picture for you. You step in, get zapped through time, and pop out to find that everyone you know now communicates solely through interpretive dance because language is so last millennium. And there you are, unable to do the meringue, looking like an absolute lemon. I knew a guy, Dave, who thought he'd outsmart the fairies by hopping through a ring quickly, like a game of magical hopscotch. Poor Dave. He hopped in and hopped out straight into a reality where his house had been replaced by a historical museum about some ancient guy named Dave who disappeared mysteriously centuries ago. Took him a week to convince the fairies to set things right, during which time he had to crash on a park bench and got adopted by pigeons. So, if you see a circle of mushrooms, just back away. No touching, no stepping, and certainly no trying to play hopscotch. Treat fairy rings with the same respect you'd treat any supernatural anomaly that could potentially ruin your credit score, or worse, your weekend. Tip 5. Guard your name like it's your Wi-Fi password. Alright, here's a hot tip that could save your ass in fairy country. Never, and I mean never, give a fairy your full name. It's like giving a hacker your social security number, only much worse because there's no fairy fraud department to call when things go sideways. Imagine you're wandering through the woods, and a fairy pops up, all glitter and smiles, asking for your name. You might think, what's the harm? Well, let me tell you. The harm is you end up being the lead donkey in a fairy donkey show that tours the underworld every Tuesday. Not a good look, my friend. Your name is like a cosmic handle on your soul. It's the ultimate backstage pass for any fairy looking to mess with you. Give them your full name, and you might as well hand over the keys to your spiritual kingdom. They'll have more control over you than your mother-in-law with a spare key to your house. So, what do you do when a suspiciously sparkly creature with an over-enthusiastic grin asks for your name? You improvise. Tell them you're Moonbeam Wildpants, or Sir Fartsalot. Anything that isn't your actual name. Make it fun, make it silly. Just make sure it can't be traced back to your birth certificate. I once knew a guy, let's call him Bob because, well, his name was actually Bob. Bob met a fairy, and thinking he was clever, told it his name was Bobbert McBobface. Good for a laugh, right? Well, the fairy thought this was his real name and started causing all sorts of havoc in Bob's life under that alias. Bob couldn't get a credit card, his mail was all mixed up, and worst of all, every pizza delivery ended up at the wrong house. The fairy was having a field day with poor Bobbert McBobface. The moral of the story? Treat your name like the last slice of pizza at a party. Don't let anyone know it's up for grabs unless you want it to disappear. Keep your true name close to your chest, or better yet, buried in a locked box under a fake bottom in your soul where not even the most mischievous fairy can find it. Because in the world of fairies, your name is your shield, your armor, and your best defense against becoming an accidental celebrity in the fairy realm. And trust me, that's one tabloid you don't want to be on the cover of. Tip 6. Turn to iron, because even fairies have their kryptonite. Listen up, because this next tip is about as crucial as remembering to wear pants to a job interview. When you're dealing with fairies, always carry a bit of iron. Why? Because fairies react to iron, like most of us react to stepping on a Lego barefoot in the middle of the night. It's their ultimate oh hell no. Iron is to fairies what garlic is to vampires, or what a stable Wi-Fi connection is to us mortals. Absolutely essential to avoid for maintaining peace of mind. There's something about the stuff that sends fairies into a tizzy. Maybe it disrupts their magical fairy dust particles or messes with their eternal vibe. Whatever the science behind it, a small iron nail in your pocket is like a fairy repellent. Now, you might be wondering, how the heck do I casually carry iron around? What am I, a 19th century blacksmith? Well, it's simpler than you think. You don't need to lug around a hunk of iron like you're training for the world's strongest man competition. A small iron keychain, a ring, or even iron beads woven into a bracelet will do the trick. Think of it as accessorizing for survival. I had a buddy once, let's call him Dave, because that's his name, and I'm crap at making up fake ones. Dave thought carrying iron was superstitious nonsense. He'd laugh and say, "What's next? Carrying a rabbit's foot and avoiding black cats?" Well, one fine spring day, Dave went hiking in a known fairy hotspot without a scrap of iron on him. Big mistake. Huge. He came back from that hike with his hair turned bright pink. Not from fear, mind you, but because a cheeky fairy thought it'd be hilarious to mess with him. Dave's hair was pink for weeks, and no amount of shampoo or pleating could change it back. It finally wore off, but by then, he had earned the nickname Bubblegum Dave, and it stuck harder than his original hair color. So, moral of the story, pack some iron. It's not just a quirky old wives' tale, it's a verified, keep your damn hair color the way it is, fairy-proof strategy. Next time you go traipsing through the fairy woods, throw on an iron bracelet or keep a nail in your pocket. It might just save your dignity, if not your sanity. Tip 7. Never thank a fairy, or you're basically screwed. Here's a tip that might save your behind next time you bump into a fairy. Never, ever thank them. I know it goes against everything your sweet old grandma taught you about manners. But listen, in the fairy realm, saying thank you is about as safe as asking your barber if they're sure they know what they're doing halfway through a haircut. Just don't. Why? Because in fairy etiquette, thanking them is pretty much like signing a contract saying, "I owe you one." And you do not want to owe a fairy anything. It's like owing money to a mobster. They will come to collect, and they won't be nice about how they take their payment. Maybe they'll decide they like your voice, so they take it. Or perhaps they fancy your firstborn child. Suddenly, that simple thank you has turned into a lifelong episode of, "Why the hell did I say that?" Instead of the usual thanks, try alternatives like, "I appreciate your help," or, "Well, wasn't that clever?" Or even, "Cool trick, dude." Anything that keeps the gratitude vague and non-committal. You want to be as non-specific as possible, lest they think you're offering them your vintage comic book collection or your sense of taste in music. Let me tell you about my buddy Pete. Pete once thanked a fairy for helping him find his way out of a particularly tricky fairy-made maze in the woods. The next day, Pete found himself unable to stop dancing. Literally, tap dancing everywhere he went, through his office, at the supermarket, in the restroom. The fairy thought it was a fitting trade. Took nearly a week to negotiate his way out of that enchantment. and he had to sacrifice his favorite socks as a peace offering. Yes, socks. Fairies are weird. If you find yourself having to interact with a fairy, keep your wits about you. Smile, nod, and back away slowly. If they've done you a favor, acknowledge it with a nod or a tip of your hat, and get the hell out of Dodge. Remember, fairies don't do charity work. Every favor comes with a price, and unless you're willing to part with your ability to say the letter S, it's better to avoid any transactions. So next time a fairy fixes your flat or points you north, resist the urge to express your thanks. Keep it cool, keep it casual, and keep your soul firmly attached to your body. Because in the fairy world, manners can indeed be too costly. Tip 8. Beware of fairy favors, the gift that keeps on taking. Ah, the old fairy favor. Sounds quaint, doesn't it? Like something you'd graciously accept at a Renaissance fair or a particularly theatrical birthday party. But let me set the record straight. Accepting a favor from a fairy is about as safe as adopting a pet dragon. It sounds cool until you're trying to figure out where the hell to store a creature that could toast your entire neighborhood. So, you find yourself in the ethereal presence of a fairy who's offering you what appears to be a harmless gift. A shimmering feather, a coin that glows in the moonlight, or maybe just a perfect acorn. While your first instinct might be to accept, because hey, free stuff, you need to slam on those mental brakes. Fairy gifts aren't like those free samples at Costco. You can't just walk away and enjoy your tiny piece of cheese in peace. Accept a gift from a fairy, and you're unwittingly signing up for their magical surprise subscription service. And let me tell you, the terms and conditions are a nightmare. This isn't just a monthly charge on your credit card. It's more like they've got your soul on speed dial. Let me paint a picture. My friend Lisa once accepted a beautiful, glowing stone from a fairy at a creek. A harmless pebble, right? Wrong. That night, her dreams transported her to the fairy realm, where she was expected to perform in their version of Fairy Idol. Every single night. She couldn't sing a note in the real world without somehow summoning rain. Great for the garden, hell on her social life. To avoid such mystical entanglements, remember this simple mantra. Just say no to fairy bling. It doesn't matter if it's a sparkling gem or a leaf that sings. Decline with something vague and polite. Try, oh, how thoughtful, but I simply couldn't. Or even, I'm allergic to enchanted objects, terribly severe sneezing fits, you understand. And what if you slip up and take the gift? Well, strap in for a wild ride, and maybe learn how to negotiate in several mystical languages. Getting out of a fairy bargain might involve anything from 3 trials by moonlight to giving up your favorite memories of your first pet. And trust me, explaining that to your therapist is no picnic. So next time a fairy offers you a simple token of their esteem, remember that with fairies, nothing is simple, and esteem might just be their word for eternal servitude. Keep your pockets empty and your wits about you. Tip 9. Keep to the path, or prepare to become part of the scenery. All right, listen up, because this next tip is crucial if you don't fancy spending eternity as a decorative statue in some fairy's garden. When you're in fairy territory, stick to the path like it's your overly clingy ex at a high school reunion. Deviate from it, and you might just find out what it feels like to be a birdbath. Or, God forbid, a gnome. You see, fairies have this fun little hobby where they turn curious wanderers into various bits of landscape furniture. It's like their version of arts and crafts. One minute you're admiring a pretty flower off the trail. The next, you're a surprisingly well-crafted sundial with a pigeon perching on your head. Not a good look. And you can forget about updating your Instagram. Sticking to the path isn't just about avoiding becoming part of the fairy decor, it's also about keeping your sanity. Fairy paths are like the yellow brick road of the enchanted world. Follow them, and you're golden. Stray from them, and you're in a world of shit. You might find yourself walking in circles, aging backwards, or speaking in tongues, which is fun at parties but not so great for your mental health. Here's a practical example. My buddy Ron. Good old Ron thought he'd take a shortcut through the woods. Found a lovely little trail that wasn't on the map. Ron was never one to stick to the beaten path. He figured all paths led somewhere, right? Well, this one led him straight into a fairy ring. See tip 4. And he spent the next 3 days convinced he was a hedgehog. Ate nothing but worms and mumbled about the stock market crash of 1929. No one knows why. So how do you make sure you stick to the safe path? First, use common sense. If the trail looks overgrown, unmarked, or suspiciously sparkly, it's a no-go. Second, consider investing in a compass. Not just any compass, a fairy-proof compass. These handy gadgets are like GPS for the magically inclined. They won't point north, they point sensible. Lastly, if you do find yourself off the path and things start to feel a bit off, don't panic. Well, try not to. Panicking in the fairy woods is like chumming the waters during Shark Week. Stay calm, retrace your steps, and whatever you do, don't follow any mysterious voices that promise shortcuts. The only thing short about those cuts is how quickly they'll shorten your tenure as a human. Remember, in the world of fairies, the path less traveled is less traveled for a reason. Stick to the beaten path, and you won't beat yourself up later for turning into a very distressed-looking birdbath. Tip 10. Watch the time, or you might miss a decade. Always, and I mean always, keep an eye on the time when you're frolicking in fairyland. Time in fairy territories is like my Aunt Edna at the casino, completely unpredictable and likely to run off with more than you can afford to lose. Let's get real for a second. You think you're just going to hop into the woods, tiptoe around some toadstools, and come back in time for dinner? Fat chance. In the realm of fairies, time doesn't just fly. It bloody teleports. 1 minute you're enjoying the sunset, and the next, you're explaining to your great-grandkids why you're still wearing bell-bottoms and asking who the hell turned the world into a sci-fi movie. Now, you might be asking, how the heck do I keep track of time when even the sun seems to be in on the conspiracy? First off, don't trust the sun in fairyland. It's about as reliable as a weather forecast during tornado season. Bring a watch, a real, mechanical one. None of that digital nonsense that relies on satellite signals or other modern witchcraft that fairies love to tamper with. Here's what happened to a buddy of mine. Let's call him Joe. Joe thought he'd outsmart the fairies by setting alarms on his phone. He strolls into the woods, alarms set for every 15 minutes, smug as a cat in a sunbeam. What Joe didn't count on was the fairies turning his phone into what might as well have been a potato. The first alarm went off not 15 minutes later, but 2 hours, and it wasn't a beep-beep but a cock-a-doodle-doo. Yes, his phone crowed like a rooster, and no, he never lived it down. If you want to play it extra safe, do what I do. Set up a fail-safe. Tell someone where you're going, and have them ready to drag your ass back to reality if you don't check in on time. It's like having a designated driver, but for navigating dimensional anomalies caused by winged tricksters. So, remember, when dealing with the fairy folk, keep one eye on the scenery and the other on your Timex. Time waits for no man. And in fairyland, it doesn't just wait. It buggers off entirely, leaving you to explain to a very different world why you still think disco is cool. Keep to the clock, and you won't have to find out the hard way that while you were chasing sprites, the world invented flying cars, and nobody uses cash anymore. Congratulations! You've navigated the treacherous and twinkling paths of the fairy realm with the guidance of this humble tome. You're no longer merely a traveler, but a seasoned explorer of the enchanting and perilous world that flutters invisibly alongside our own. You've armed yourself with knowledge that stretches back through whispers of folklore and the sharp breath of experience, ready to recount tales that will flicker like firelight in the eyes of your listeners. But as you step back into the mundane world, remember that the borders of fairyland are never truly far away. They ripple just beneath the surface of moonlit parks and twist through the underbrush of your favorite hiking trail. With each step outside, carry forward the respect, caution, and curiosity that this guide has instilled. For the world is wide, the shadows deep, and the fairies ever watchful.